Hi, I'm Charlie from Reader to Writer, and today I wanted to do a wrap-up of all the books I read in September 2017, last month. In September, I read 18 books. I don't usually read that many books, but I am trying to read all of the books that I own before I move sometime between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and so I have books that I'm trying to read right now that are shorter. So I also had more time to read last month because I have two little kids and they were sick at two separate times in the month, and that gave me a lot of extra time when I was snuggling them or letting them sleep on me, and I was able to pull out a book while they were doing that. So the first book I read was What We Wish We'd Known When We Were Newlyweds by John and Kimberly Bytheway. John Bytheway is an LDS speaker. He's really popular. I have seen him in person and listened to a lot of his talks, so I knew that I really liked him already, but I did really enjoy this book. I actually gave it 5 stars. It's a really short, quick read, but it has a lot packed into it, so if you're married or engaged, I would definitely recommend reading it, even if you're not LDS, because he doesn't really talk about anything to do with the LDS church as much as just common principles that all people should do in a good relationship. The next book I read was Peter Pan by Jade and Barrie. I'd never read Peter Pan before, but I used to love the Disney live action one with Jeremy Sumpter. I loved Jeremy Sumpter when I was 14. And one of my best friends from around that time remembered that love I had for Peter Pan, and so one year for my birthday recently she gave me this beautiful illustrated, it's an interactive book. The illustrations are just really cool, go along really well with the whole Peter Pan feel. The illustrator is, I'm going to say this wrong, Minalima. I know she's done a few other children's classics. I know she's done Beauty and the Beast, and I have a few of her illustrated books on my wish list on Amazon. And I had a lot of fun reading Peter Pan too. I actually would give Peter Pan 5 stars as well. The adventures that they go on are very enticing to adults as well as to kids, and I can't wait until my kids are old enough that I can read this book to them. The next book I read was Glimpses into the Life and Heart of Marjorie Hinckley by Virginia H. Pearce. So Marjorie Hinckley was married to Gordon B. Hinckley, a prophet of the LDS Church previously before he died. This book is a compilation of both her words and interviews about her with other people, and I thought it was absolutely beautiful and inspiring. I gave it 5 stars. Hearing about her life made me want to be a better person, and then hearing her words inspired me even more. The next book I read was Dear Mr. President. The author is Andrea Davis Pinkney. It's actually written for a younger audience. The letters are fictional, but they worked really hard to make them sound the way that they would if Lincoln were talking or if a slave girl were talking. I guess this is actually part of a Dear Mr. President series, so I would be interested in getting the rest. I really did enjoy it, and I actually learned some things about history from it, and since it was such an easy read, I was able to read it in like a day and still learn a lot from it. The next book I read was The Overton Window by Beck. I guess he has a radio talk show where he talks about politics. This one I would give 4 stars. I thought it was well written, but it was very dense at times. Kind of hard to get through. Maybe if you were more into political thrillers. I don't know a lot about politics. I definitely agree with the overall theme of the book. I thought it was good enough to keep for now. It has a sequel that I may read at some point in the future. The next book I read was The Last Lecture by Randi Pausch, and this was written by a professor who had terminal cancer and knew it was terminal, and he gave a final lecture at the university that he taught at. I did think it was good enough to keep for now. 4 stars. The next book I read was Honey for a Child's Heart by Gladys M. Hunt. I actually started a few months ago before I started reading all the books I own, and then when my kids were sick, I ended up reading it on my phone while I was holding children and finished it. The book talks about giving your kids good books and the benefits of reading aloud to your kids and creating a family culture of reading. If you have children, I would definitely recommend reading Honey for a Child's Heart. The next book I read I absolutely loved. I gave it 5 stars. It's called Look Up My Soul by Gerald Lund. Gerald Lund is brilliant. I have read a lot of his fiction. Gerald Lund is so knowledgeable. He just knows so much. He studied so much. He obviously reads so much. And he is so good at presenting the knowledge in a way that makes it logical and makes it so easy as a reader for you to understand it. And I left this book inspired to be better. There were specific things that I came away from this book committed to do that I've been following through on, and I'm so grateful for that. It makes me want to go get all the rest of his nonfiction books and read them. The next book I have is Walk Tall, You're a Daughter of God. This is a book that I have had for as long as I can remember. I don't know when my mom gave it to me. It's actually really old. It has an inscription here given to my grandma Pat in 1996. I think it was published in 1953. I gave it 4 stars. I think part of the reason I only thought it was a 4-star book was because I'm reading it now and not when I was in high school. If I was in high school and I read it, I think I would enjoy it more. Amy Glenn actually wrote the song Walk Tall, You're a Daughter of God, and then wrote this book afterwards about the song. The next book I read was The Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. This book I actually gave a 4-star review as well. I liked it. I did not like it as much as a lot of the other children's literature that I've read. I liked it more than the movie. The thing that I noticed as I read this book was all of the differences from the movie. It is completely different. Like, her shoes in the book aren't even red, they're silver. She doesn't even meet the Wicked Witch of the West until halfway through the book, and then they like stay with the witch for like weeks as her slaves until Dorothy accidentally melts her. And she's like 7 or something in this book. She's really young. It's definitely really different from the movie in really good ways, I think. It's just not my favorite children's classic, but it's still really good, and it's also a really easy read. So if you're wanting to get into classics and starting to read classics, but you're worried about how difficult the reading level will be, you should definitely try out some of the children's classics, because the reading level isn't as hard, but it's still written in that classic language, and it still has those magical, old-fashioned type elements in them. The next book I read was The Wish by Gail Carson Levine. I love Gail Carson Levine. Her book, Ella Enchanted, was actually my favorite book when I was younger. It's still one of my favorites. This book is actually set in our world for kids between the ages of 8 and 12, about a girl in middle school who is really unpopular. She gives up her seat to this lady on the bus, and the lady turns out to be a magical person and gives her one wish, and she wishes to become the most popular girl at her school. The book is about her figuring out how to keep her wish from ending, and it's actually a really, really good book. The themes of loyalty and friendship are really strong. My next book that I read was Way to Be by Gordon B. Hinckley. He had 9 B's that he encouraged people to do. Be grateful, be smart, be involved, be clean, be true, be positive, be humble, be still, and be prayerful. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was The Abolition of Men by C.S. Lewis. I love C.S. Lewis. I love everything he's written. He basically just talks about how we can't take morals out of science and logic. It is a harder read. I had a hard time understanding some of his arguments and what he was talking about, and I had to look up a lot of words. I think it's definitely worth reading. I think it is good to stretch yourself when you're reading sometimes, especially with a lot of the other easier books that I was reading. It was nice to come across one that was a little more challenging and rewarding. The next book I read was The Letters in the Jade Dragon Box by Gail Sears. This is a historical novel that takes place after, I don't know how you say this, Mao Zedong. I don't know how to say Chinese words. He was the communist chairman of China when they first started that type of government. It was very, very sad and very educational to read about the things that went on in that type of government when they had such a horrible, horrible ruler who did not care about the people at all and who could do basically whatever he wanted. And some of the things that happened were absolutely horrible. This book does a really good job of portraying them without leaving you too sick at heart and too revolted, but still impressing upon you the seriousness of it. Oh, it was so beautiful. It's a very beautifully written book, very masterful character development. There's not really any romance in it, but there's a lot of friendship and family relationships that are grown throughout the book. And the history in it is subtle enough and written in such a way to be really interesting. I couldn't put it down. The next book I read was Believing Christ by Stephen E. Robinson, and this is another LDS nonfiction book. It's 5 out of 5 stars. Again, it is so good. The next book I read was Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm by Kate Douglas Wiggin. Another children's classic that I have owned for like forever, but never actually read. I loved this book. It's basically an Anne of Green Gables for younger audience, which is a really good thing. The other thing that I really loved was that Rebecca loves to read. She really goes far with her education, and I really loved that. I think that this is a really good book to read to young girls because it helps them have a strong female role model in literature. The next book I read was also on my phone. It was also one that I had started reading before my personal challenge to read all the books I own, but then I did get to it while my kids were sick, and it's called Mindset by Carol S. Dweck. It was such a good book. It's literally changed my life and the way that I view my life, the way I view my children, the way I parent. I definitely would recommend reading Mindset by Carol S. Dweck. The last book I read was really short, but so good. It was The Constitution, A Heavenly Banner by Ezra Taft Benson. And he does talk briefly about some LDS beliefs, but if you're not LDS, it's still worth a read because of the way that he talks about the Constitution and the role of the government, and he's very logical. He sets out the principles that a government should be based off of. It has inspired me to study the Constitution more. 5 out of 5 stars. And really, really quick read. You could literally read this in a day. So those are the books I read last month. If you've read any of these books and enjoyed them, or if you read any books last month that you really enjoyed, let me know in the comments below. Thanks.